Eleni Stroulia is a professor in the computing science department here at UofA. So she does a lot of work in like AI for society and so on. Her flagship project in the area of healthcare is the Smart Condo, in which she investigates the use of technology to support people with chronic conditions live independently longer and to educate health science students to provide better care for these clients. So these are some of one of the interesting projects that she does. And let's listen to her for more details on AI for society and how she's working in that direction. So over to you, Eleni.
Thank you so much for this introduction, Niraj. And thank you for having me today in this meeting. It's always a pleasure to listen to your speakers. And I'm just terribly excited and a little bit stressed to be part of this group. So I'll tell you about AI for society today. So really, AI for society. I know some of you were there yesterday in the Emmy Open House event, and it was a just lovely opportunity to see the breadth of AI work that was presented there. And that's pretty much the mission, the scope of AI for society. It is a signature area at the University of Alberta, which basically means it is an umbrella organization for faculty members who consider their research to be in, about, or around AI. And the objective of the signature area is to amplify the interdisciplinary collaborative research activities within campus and train more students and develop more programs in this area, because it is so necessary that our next generation has the skills to contribute to this amazingly technologically important area, and to actually make more introductions between our community, within our community, between our community and in campus and the world at large. So the way our mission should be described potentially is just to enable network effects within our on-campus community and enable more interesting activities. What is the scope of what AI for society considers relevant? I just want to take a very high level view of what makes the current AI contributions possible. First off, we have an abundance of data. All our activities are software mediated, and every time we interact with our cell phones or any application, data is collected. In fact, we have a variety of sensors that monitor our environment, whether it is natural or built. These data used to be lost because we did not have enough capacity for storage and management. But now with the ubiquitous cloud infrastructure, these data can become available for analysis. And of course, we have powerful AI algorithms that can distill models from this data and gain insights about what the implications of this information is. And once you have these models, then you can use them to classify experience and observations. You can use to predict what the next state of the world is, and you can use it to support information dissemination and decision-making in all sorts of activities. So AI is pervasive, and it is impacting everything that we do, and it is a huge part of our economic activity. So reading the 2021 Canadian Venture Capital Market report, we can see that they identify the VC investments, they categorize them in 4 areas. The biggest one is ICT, and you can see the sharp spike of ICT in 2021 relative to 2022, which basically indicates that about 10 billion worth of deals were closed in 2021, and that was about 430 deals. And if you look in the report, a major part of this ICT spike is AI related. And I would argue that many of the spikes that we see in the life sciences, clean tech, and agribusiness is also IT related, because there's so many opportunities in using AI in the life sciences and smart agriculture and technology work. So it's big business. And it's also part of key priorities of our federal government. So if you look at the federal priorities for science, technology, and innovation, there are 5 pillars, and one of the pillars is technologically advanced Canada. So 1 of 5 is technologically advanced. And if you look at what technologically advanced Canada means for the feds, 12 priorities or 12 themes. And of these 12 themes, I'll mention just 3. About 5 are technology AI related, but the 3 that I mentioned here are the most obvious ones explicitly linking to AI algorithms. So the first one is artificial intelligence. The Feds mentioned machine and deep learning, human emotions and language applications, including indigenous languages, surveillance and computer vision. The second area talks about big data and analytics, focusing on Internet of Things and blockchain, predictive and cognitive analytics. And the third area is smart digital manufacturing, talking about robotics, industry 4.0, embedded sensors, and so on and so forth. So if these are the 3 areas of interest, I would like to tell you 3 stories about related research in the context of AI for society. This is research from people on our campus, working with each other across disciplines and solving interesting problems in these 3 important areas. So my presentation today is not going to be terribly deep in technical details, but what I want to highlight is that here at the U of A, we're doing work on everything that is considered important, and the work is amazing. And I want to celebrate all these people and encourage every one of you to go and learn more about this work and potentially participate. So without further ado, let's start with the AI for Buzz project. So I'm sure everybody's aware that energy is hugely important to Alberta and Canada at large. If you look at the top right infographic, it basically talks about 180 billion worth of projects, energy-related projects that were canceled in Canada. And one example is the Frontier Oil Sands Mine project. It's the first example in Alberta, which was worth about 21 billion. And apparently, if you read the story, and I have not delved too deeply in the story, but it was canceled in a weekend by the sponsor because of the strong opposition of environmental groups. Note that this was at a time when the oil price was low, and even though the project had support from indigenous First Nations groups that would be affected by the activity in their area, and even though there was strong financial support, it was canceled apparently in a weekend. So these decisions are big, the implications are big. 21 billion is nothing to just ignore. And who would like these decisions to be more informed, and who would like to be made not so seemingly, apparently, abruptly. Now, on the top left, I have a map of all the energy activities across Canada. And as you can see, that we're not talking only about oil sands, we're talking about a whole lot of natural resources that are a huge part of our economy. So this project, led by Leanne Lefsrud in engineering, and in collaboration with a non-government organization, the Canadian Energy and Climate Nexus, is looking at the conversations about energy in Canada. Also involved are Denise Barbosa and myself from computing science. Joel Gaiman used to be a professor in business here, and he's now a colleague at George Washington University. So what's the problem and what's the task that the project is aiming to accomplish? Basically, the Canadian Energy Climate Nexus contacted Leanne Lefsrud, and they basically said, wouldn't it be nice if we could understand these conversations? We would like to understand what people are talking about, who are the major people managing the conversation or leading the conversation, what are their values and their priorities and their sentiments about the discussions around energy, and what can we draw from the past discussions so that we can manage the conversation and support solution-based policy conversations. So policy and decisions should not be made abruptly. They should be made on the deep understanding of what the community values and what they think is important right now for our society. There are a whole lot of technical methods, algorithms on topic modeling and network analysis and sentiment analysis and regression analysis to understand the correspondences between the tenor of the conversation and the final decisions or the numbers of the influence of the participants. And what we wanted to get out of applying these technical methods to our problem was to figure out who we need to talk to and how can we communicate with them in order to understand their priorities and help them revise potentially their practices in order to reach an agreement on these important decisions. So most of us are familiar with sentiment analysis, but what happened in this project, what I learned, is that there's a whole lot of area of work in business primarily focusing on human values. So there has been work that basically classifies in a two-dimensional space people's values. And the two dimensions are social orientation versus personal orientation and fear versus openness to change. And what is basically the state of the world right now is that there has been a dictionary of words associated with these personal values, where every personal value belongs in this two-dimensional space. And now, similar to how we do sentiment analysis based on words that have a sentiment valence, we can do human values analysis based on these dictionaries. But we want to do it on a large scale. So part of our work in this project has been the expansion of our ability to deal with huge data sets. One of our students has built an architecture that is enabled by CreateDB, which is a distributed database. And basically what we have is a system that can take both big files of tweets, but also real-time tweets through a client that looks at Twitter, collect these data sets and do three analyses. The first analysis is based on a set of lexicons. So we have the personal values lexicon, we have a sentiment lexicon, we also have a humor dictionary that was developed by a UofA professor in psychology, Chris Westbury, who was also collaborator with Liane Lefsrud in the past. In addition to these general dictionaries, we have developed a methodology for extracting domain-specific words, which we call aspects. So essentially, all our tweets are analyzed in terms of 4 types of dictionaries, and we count the word appearance and the frequencies, and these frequencies lead us to classify every tweet in terms of personal values, whether it's funny or not, whether it's positive or negative, and what aspect of the energy ecosystem it talks about. We also analyze the elements, the lexical elements of the tweet in terms of how many handles it includes, emojis, expanded URLs, images, hashtags. And we also apply industry metrics to understand their influence and their how much engagement they cost with the community. So what do you get out of this? Essentially, we had a whole lot of visualizations that can show us what's going on in this domain. And if you see, it's very easy to recognize peaks in the conversations. And every one of these dates where you have a peak in the conversation is meaningful. And the peak that I'm highlighting here is October 5, 2017, when the Energy East pipeline was canceled. And if you look at the conversation around this date, you can see that it was primarily negative. And we can see that pretty much all personal values are represented, but the most frequent ones, the more prevalent ones, were achievement, self-direction, and power. Now, to be completely honest, when you see this analysis, it's not clear exactly what the conversation is about. But if we look a little bit in the words that people are using within each one of these personal values, we look that people were talking mostly about work and jobs, and this was generally positive. In terms of self-direction, people were talking about the decision, not surprisingly, and plans for the future. And in terms of power, the environmental groups were primarily talking about victory and possibly making plans for how to proceed with future plans. If we look at the aspects that were discussed, the domain-specific dictionary, if you will, the most obvious words, again, were jobs and unemployment. This was a high-level concern. And on the other side, you have the environment words. And in terms of the cost aspect, again, discussions were prevalent with words like price and cost and worth or not worth. Now, this analysis is sort of superficial, but when it becomes interesting is when we correlate the numbers of words in each category with influence. And this is why we build an additional component to allow all sorts of explorations to begin with ANOVA between the counts of words that we have extracted through these dictionaries and the various measures of influence and engagement that the various tweets and users have. And this basically tells us something about what makes an impact, what makes a splash into Interverse. What we have found is that primarily the modality, the structure of the tweets is important in making a splash. Some tweets have lots of hashtags and lots of names and lots of images and URLs. But what we saw is that the best impact is someplace in sort of the valley of modality 3. So if we count every single element, words is one element, hashtags, URLs, images, videos, if every one of these counts as a modality, tweets with modality 3 or 4 tend to be the most influential. They have to be interesting enough to be paid attention to, but so just words do not usually have an impact, but if they become too complex, they just appear to be losing their impact. So that may be some advice on how to structure your tweets in order to increase engagement. And now we're working more on the issue of actually what are the proper words to use to generate the proper effect in the conversation. So now this was interesting, but what happened while we were working on that, we got in touch, actually Brian McQueen, which is a political science professor in Regina, got in touch with AI for Society, and he basically said, well, I want to study radicalized groups online. Apparently, the war is happening online. Armed groups have informal proxies that update the world at large on their activities. Sometimes they have official spokespersons, and sometimes they have a dedicated office to basically communicate their activities and interests. And what Brian McQueen wants to do is to do this analysis of the online communications on multiple social platforms in order to understand how armed groups work, what they're doing, and how to better support humanitarian efforts. So we put a big group together. Brian put a big group together with strong participation from the UofA. And as you can see, a partner is the International Crisis Group, which is associated with the United Nations, in order to apply the same kind of techniques, but at a much larger scale. So let me tell you a little bit about what's happening online with armed groups. Armed groups, there is a lot of disinformation going on, and I cannot actually speak to the slide that I have, but really one interesting story more recently with the Ukraine is that Russia announced that the Ukrainian forces were about to attack a city. Then the Russians attacked the city, and then they posted online information about the destruction, claiming that they were the Ukrainians. So this information is about telling an almost true story with evidence, namely pictures and dates and places, but not really telling the truth. And this is a very important problem to address in this context. Armed groups claim victories. They advertise their successes. They also post negative comments and negative tweets about governments, sometimes incorrect, factually incorrect. And they also celebrate the life in the places they occupy. The whole point of this campaign is to basically recruit members and funding. So what do we need to do here? The problem is similar, but much more difficult. We have many more social platforms. Images and videos are hugely important, much more so than the work that we have done on words up until now. We're dealing with many languages. And of course, understanding the similar types of dictionaries that we have developed in English will become relevant in multiple languages, basically understanding the value and the sentiment that different languages, different words in different languages carry. And of course, integrating the data from multiple social platforms to identify the same individual in, say, YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, and sort of develop these profiles about who are the influencers. The tasks that we want to solve is to recognize international human law violations. We want to do the same things, recognize the influencers, their ideology and their values. We actually want to measure the size of the groups and how much money and what kind of human resources they have. How are they supported by the community? So retweets and likes could be what used to be engagement in the world of Twitters, can be community support for an armed group in this problem. We also want to be able to offer substantial support to humanitarian efforts who want to go and support the people in the place where these activities take place. So this is same problem, but much more important, I would say. And what I want to tell you now is a little bit about what AI for Society did for this story. So Lefshut and Yemen were already working together, and when Canadian Energy Climate Nexus approached them, but they did not have the computing science expertise and the software engineering expertise, which is where Denilson, Barbosa, and myself came in. We got support from MITAX to build a robust software pipeline. And then when Brian McQueen came to AI for Society, we were able to link the two groups and sort of build a big AI group, a big UofA participation in this NFRF transformation grant. Right now, all of these people are involved in a CFI foundation proposal that has as an objective to develop infrastructure for supporting these kinds of social problems. There's quite a bit of infrastructure for supporting industry-led research, but if you have groups that are non-government, not-for-profit, social enterprises, there's not enough support, and AI is hungry in terms of computational power. So that's the objective of our CFI and a similar parallel alliance, NSERC alliance, to expand our Canadian energy climate nexus. So that's one of the stories on sentiment analysis, and I'll switch gears. So if you have any questions on that, that's the time for me to breathe and have a glass of water, and for you to ask any questions that I would be happy to try to answer. Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and talk about smart buildings. So this work bridges primarily computing science and engineering with participation from the health sciences, the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. And we are talking about integrating semantic building models and developing design technologies to optimize the design of buildings, and also developing methodologies for optimizing the management of buildings for energy savings and occupant comfort optimization. Now, buildings are essentially embedded with IoT devices, and they're huge, complex cyber-physical systems that expend much energy and incur lots of costs for their management. So we want to be able to reason about how buildings are built, what materials we're using, and this is the objective of this ontology that has been recently developed, the building information models. Basically, what you have here is not a simple 3D model, but rather a containment hierarchy of types. We have a building that contains floors, that contain rooms and corridors, and the rooms contain windows and doors and materials on the floors and walls and so on and so forth. So every one of these types has its own properties and relations to each other. And every one of these things that has a physical representation corresponds to a 3D mesh. So when you see the building in 3D, not only do you have how it looks, you also have a very deep typology of all the elements it consists of, including the devices that it contains, like thermostat and temperature sensors and HVAC systems and heating systems and batteries and solar panels and all of that stuff. So first we did some work on actually laying out the design of the building, because accessibility and usability in the real world can be captured to a degree through a bunch of rules. So developed a domain-specific language to capture the rules that many architects use for laying out the interior space of a building. And that came primarily from a company that we were working with called CADSoft. And now once you have rules about what makes a design good or bad, then you can employ search methodologies to actually generate a design from scratch. So we start with an empty room and we overlay a grid for where things can be placed. And then we perform a very exhaustive hierarchical search, placing things and evaluating the rules. And the placements that optimize the rule evaluation get pushed further for elaboration and refinement and addition of more elements. Now, once you have a model of the building, you can start doing simulations of how people live in the building. And in general, there are two types of simulations. For the most part, the industry standard has been to do scenario-based simulations. So if you see at the top right, we have information about what people do at home. They eat and sleep, and we have some information about how frequently these activities take place and how many times in the week. And these scenarios can be put through a planning agent and generate a plan with timestamps of when the agent performs what activity. And in between these activities, we have another agent that plans the actual movements of the occupant from its position to the next between activities. So what you can see here is two traces. The first one is more coarse-grained because it reflects the sequence of activities of the simulated agent. The second one has more detail because it fills up the gaps between two different activities with movements. And the movements have to be between locations where the locations afford the activity. So for example, if you need to eat, you need to sit at a table, and that's part of the affordances that the BIM model supports. But if you need to sleep, you need to find something like a bed or a couch. So between the table and the couch, you have to move, and this is what happens from the first trace to the next one. And now that becomes interesting with COVID, because what we were able to do is basically take this human activity simulator and place it in an office building, Athabasca Hall, which we had modeled in BIM. And now we can simulate the various numbers of people in Athabasca Hall to explore different scenarios. If you remember, there was a time when schools were thinking about having morning and afternoon cohorts, or having cohorts that would go, cohorts of students that would go to school 2 days, Monday, Tuesday, and the other cohort would go Thursday, Friday, and Wednesday would be kept to clean the school. So if you want to model and simulate these alternative scenarios to figure out which one would most likely minimize infection, you want to simulate them in the context of the building. And this is exactly what we did. And we used two different types of simulation models. One was the scenarios that I showed you that was developed in the Smart Condo work because we had more rich activities of individual occupants, but we also used Markov models that we learned from data that we extracted from the check-in app at the University of Alberta during COVID. And as we were simulating the various agents moving around Athabasca Hall, we were counting how frequently they stay close to each other for sufficient amount of time to pass the virus from one person to the other. And that essentially simulates wearable sensors. So basically, if a person is wearing a sensor and comes in close contact with another, the sensors can recognize each other. So through this work, we identified basically which scenarios were better, more likely to reduce spread. How do you need to split the people in how many cohorts, and how do you need to constrain their activities within the building in order to allow them, to enable them to do what they need to do for their work and still reduce the spread of the virus. So this was work that was built primarily in the Smart Condo group, but really there was parallel work led primarily by Omidar Dakanian, who was looking at the energy consumption. Excuse me. Basically what happens is, even though buildings are substantially instrumented, most of the time we don't have enough electric meters to know how much energy is consumed by a group of offices, say. So for many of you who are in Athabasca Hall, we don't know whether the left wing or the right wing of a basketball consumes more energy, because I think we have 1 electric meter for a floor. And even if I'm factually wrong on that, you get the point. We have meters for big groups of spaces, and so this is not fine-grained information. So the first problem that Omid started working on is how can he actually understand occupancy using machine learning? As people's schedules change, and because we don't have fine-grained information, couldn't we use machine learning techniques to basically infer fine-grained occupancy information from higher order, from more coarse-grained information? And why is it important? Because really, if you understand occupancy, you can control the building better. Right now, buildings are controlled by coarse-grained rules that basically say heat the building to, I don't know, 20 degrees from 8 to 5, even if the building is empty. That's typically what happens for the most part. If we knew occupancy, though, we would only heat small areas, thus saving energy and reducing greenhouse effects. So occupancy estimation is a hugely important problem, and that was the first thing that is necessary for better energy control. And the next aspect of energy control is the actual control algorithm. So reinforcement learning, which is our invention here, Saturn has literally written the book on reinforcement learning, is perfectly appropriate for learning policies to best control HVAC and shading systems so that energy can be saved. So these results are primarily from simulations, and Omid has shown that 11% more energy can be saved in the winter and 32% more energy in the summer by essentially heating less and cooling less different areas of the building, because the RL agent is focusing primarily on occupancy and not so much on rules. So basically, this was 2 parallel areas of work that were happening at the same time, while also Peter Muslak at TCE was having a very large alliance grant involving all major energy companies in Alberta. So through AI for Society, we got support to develop a substantial grant to help make the new Dent Farm building smart. Now, the cool story is that the Dent Farm building is 100 years old, but it's going to be the newest building on campus because all its interior is renovated completely. So basically the shell remains, the beautiful shell remains, and everything inside will be completely new, and it's going to be the home of computing science and math and other people. So now we have a whole group of people that were working independently, bringing along many more from civil engineering and ECE and Faculty of Medicine, and Nidhi Hegde and Pari Damansep from computing, to try to understand occupancy, what makes buildings comfortable, and how to better manage it in order to make it more sustainable. This building will have many more sensors. It will have many more fine-grained meters, and we're working also with the Energy Management and Sustainability Office to get additional small research projects funding to study the deployment of the technology, the efficiencies that can be gained, and people's happiness with the space. This group of people and more will belong in a national smart buildings network involving people from Carleton and Ryerson, Toronto Metropolitan University, and also a residential smart home in Greece that has been alive through European projects for about 5 years now, and they have quite a nice history of data that we hope to share and apply our algorithms to. In parallel, I want to mention an event that was recently held on reimagining public spaces and built environments in the post-pandemic world, led by Paul Messenger of Business and Vivian Manask, a local architect, where there was involved about 50 people who presented papers on what architecture and city planning, urban planning can become after our experiences with the use of spaces, the notions of comfort, the notion of socialization that we had to sort of relearn during the pandemic. Again, I'm taking a breath. giving you an opportunity to grill me a little bit on smart buildings before I talk about another amazing group on computational psychiatry.
Eleni, I just said in the chat, that's pretty amazing that you've taken that opportunity with medicine dentistry on that latest renovations that can really build forward. So, wow.
So currently she's leading a group on health cities. She's been consulting with the city of New York, and she's very interested in actually studying how to make people healthier in the building, you know, including all these cool tricks with the stairs that are interesting and get people motivated to go through the stairs instead of the elevators, having good food choices in the building, having events and potential exercise meetings in the building to both, you know, push social life and healthy living. So, and there are so many people who are interested in conducting social studies in the building for how to improve individual people's life beyond energy and thermal comfort. So I'm very excited to have this living lab there, which is going to be so beautiful and such a potential locus of activity, of cool activity in all disciplines. Yeah, so thanks for asking about the UofA MD, because I have more to say about that.
Well, what a collaboration, though. Often people, like, you know, hats off. I'm certain you had to coordinate with so many entities to make sure it could all come together. So I'm in awe of the undertaking.
Thanks. You know, you just have to have a cool idea and people who are excited about it, and then things become easier. I certainly don't have a recipe that can be replicated for everything. The 3 projects are amazing, and every one of the people involved are terribly excited about what they're doing. So, and that certainly holds true for computational psychiatry, which is Russ Greiner's, Russ is the key member that made this group happen. It includes a whole bunch of people from psychiatry and several people who are interested in computational methodologies for health and mental health, and also people from business. And these are only the people in the U of A. There are so many more colleagues across Canada and internationally interested in this difficult problem. So I'm not going to say, so Russ led a study for recognizing Alzheimer's dementia from speech. So Russ, if I mess up, please do jump in. Let me check the chat. I haven't been doing that.
Yeah, Eleni, there are questions in the chat.
So I'm not sure what, so I'm going to take a break and answer the questions. And then I'll continue with computational psychiatry. Sure. Okay. How much more expensive is it compared to a normal building? Both of, yes. Is that okay, Niraj, or do you want me to take the questions at the end?
Whatever suits you. I
would prefer to do it in context.
Wonderful.
So this is
yeah, that would be great. So I'll just read out the question for everyone.
Thank you.
So how much more expensive is this compared to normal building, both upfront and long term? Or rather, what are the cost differences?
So this is a very good question, and I cannot actually give you a correct answer, but let me go back to this point here. In simulations, okay, never mind. In simulations, we have shown, Omidar Dakanian has shown that you can save about 10% in the winter and 30% or 32% in the summer, cooling and heating costs. And it all depends on our environment too. So if you are in a milder climate, then the control for energy is less important and the savings are probably going to be less. But we live in a terribly difficult environment, and heating costs are terribly expensive. So if you consider that the building lives for more than 30 years, at least, the investment in actually saving money in the long run will far outperform the costs of making the building smart. Now, this is our guess, this is our hypothesis, and there is a lot of work across this National Smart Buildings Network to keep this data and actually prove this hypothesis. But our understanding based on simulations and based on our climate is that it is a very good investment. In addition,
Absolutely.
don't forget the savings in the greenhouse emission gases.
You're right, Eleni. I've been involved in smart, as an engineer in North American-wide smart buildings initiatives, and having the sensors in now instead of trying to put them in later is such a cost savings, right? So well done.
And there was another question, Niraj?
Yes, there is another question. This one is from Amit. Can this smart building energy consumption model be enhanced to any such feature, like how much energy consumed by an individual and how?
The answer is yes, possibly. So we have smart meters for basically, the electrical panels measure energy in different zones. So the more electrical panels, the more fine-grained information we have. We plan to deploy smart plugs so that appliances can also be measured. So computing is expensive. I know sometimes in my office, I use an electric heater because I cannot really control my office. We can also see thermostat fights. So if there are multiple thermostats in a group of offices, all of which control the same heating and cooling devices, I turn it up, you turn it down, and basically this is completely inefficient. And we have seen cases in an Ecobit data set where at the same time, so basically the HVAC system, the air conditioning switches on to bring the temperature down, and then it goes quite a bit down from the threshold, and then the heater comes in to bring the temperature back to the threshold. So these kinds of naive switch on, switch off are very expensive and greenhouse emission heavy, and they're very just bad for the environment. So these are the things that we want to sort of observe and eliminate. I think that was a question, but I'm not quite sure.
So yeah, thanks for that. Then Ellen asks, is this the domain of architecture? Will architect work with an AI analyst?
That's a very good question. And I would argue that the whole point of AI for society is to say that these problems are the domain of so many people. So architects know something about how people feel comfortable, but if you leave it completely open, it's difficult to heat and it's difficult to cool down. So what is the balance between designing a space that people feel comfortable being in and it's pleasant and aesthetically appealing, but also it is manageable from an energy point of view? That's why you need to bring all these people together to have a big look at the problem and sort of take into account as many constraints and as many requirements as possible. So that's why I wanted to impress upon you that this group here is computing, engineering, medicine, architecture, business, and they potentially more people would need to be involved, including absolutely the occupants. So maybe I'll go next and talk about computational psychiatry, because this is such an amazing work, and then we can catch up with the rest of the questions at the end, Niraj?
Sure, that would be.
Okay. So I already introduced this group, and I want to talk about two projects. There are just so many projects, it was very difficult to choose, and I just chose two panels from the poster that was presented at the Chancellor's Forum recently. So the first work is about Alzheimer's dementia. It's very difficult to diagnose dementia. The current state-of-the-art ways of doing so are through a PET scan and also through a long conversation and questionnaire with a professional. So this is both tedious and time-consuming, and wouldn't be nice if we had some indicator that was easier to obtain, that we can use to at least get an alert that there may be, somebody may be suffering from Alzheimer's, so that early prognosis, early diagnosis can help with treatment and better prognostic outcome. It turns out that there is a large curated data set of people describing a picture of a bunch of kids stealing cookies from a cookie jar and creating a mess in the kitchen. So we looked at this data set, Russ leading the study, to see where in the textual information of people's descriptions or in their voice, we could find indicators for people who suffer from dementia versus people who do not. So we explored a variety of, this is a lot of data. If you analyze audio, which is some work that one of my students had done, there are many different ways of extracting different features from audio. Some of the features are at each individual timestamp, some are window-based, and they capture different aspects of the voice. So our study involved a systematic exploration of the parameter space, how to reduce the dimensionality of the data, what algorithms you use, with what parameters, which data to take into account, the text, the audio, or both. And we eventually ended up with classification accuracy of 85%, which basically says that we can recognize, we can classify who and who does not have dementia with this percentage. And we can also estimate how likely a person is to have dementia, essentially the root mean square error relative to the MMSE score. MMSE is the mini mental state exam. And it goes from 0 to 30. And the higher the score, the more likely to be suffering from dementia. So the RMSE refers to the MMSE score, and it was 5.6 for the regression task. So we predicted the MMSE. So these numbers are good. I wouldn't say that they're terribly exciting. They're close to the state of the art, but what I think is terribly exciting is the fact that you are using easily accessible data, namely people's voice, to extract indicators for something that can have such an impact on the individual's life and in the family's life. So we're taking this work further, trying to develop an app that will do so from natural voice, not from this relatively well-curated data set that is used as a benchmark. And a similar idea is to use speech, basically both information that's been conveyed in the text and also the voice, to detect PTSD. And I was going to talk about it, but Jeff is doing an excellent job.
Researchers have developed a tool to identify people with post-traumatic stress disorder by analyzing their words on paper. Researchers did hundreds of interviews with people with and without PTSD. The interviews were transcribed, then the text was analyzed by a machine learning model. That analysis was able to determine with 80% accuracy whether the interviewee had PTSD or not. Researchers say the findings will be particularly helpful as online therapy appointments become more common.
Maybe that'll give them some more information about, whether this person may be suffering from PTSD or maybe it might be something else. And that's very important, is getting the diagnosis right early on so that the person can have a better prognostic outlook.
The team says this research could help with the identification of other mental illnesses.
So I will pass on.
University of Alberta researchers have.
Okay. So what's the story? What is the AI for Society story on that? Okay. As I said, the cornerstone of this work is Greiner and his numerous psychiatric colleagues. In parallel, Randy Gebel and Osmar Zayan have been working on analyzing sentiment from text that is obtained from Alberta Health Services. These are phone calls that users make to AHS to ask information about their conditions. And I had been doing a little bit of work on mental health of seniors in the context of the age well NSE. But what happened, what AI for Society contributed to this was first, through funding that was established by the UofA and the Tec de Monterrey in Mexico, a subgroup of us, Cloud Cow from Psychiatry and Luis Angel Trejo Rodriguez from ITESM, have a project that will be evaluating this app that I mentioned. So we have an app that is both in English and Spanish, and students on both campuses can use to record their answers to a question that is meant to elicit their emotions, as well as reading and standard text. And we hope to be able to do similar work on this natural text, so instead of actually having the highly curated data that I mentioned. We have a proposal pending with NSERC, and Osmar Zayan has connected with Mood Disorders Canada to develop a chatbot that will give resources, will guide people who may suffer from mental health disorders through resources, both of information and services available to them to address their needs. Ras will talk more about machine learning for precision health or precision medicine. He's giving the grand rounds next Tuesday, 8 o'clock in the morning. Have a look at the poster or visit our website to find information and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Forgive me, Ras. So, I gave you 3 examples that fit within the federal priorities, but I also want to emphasize the society aspect of AI for society. We're very keen to understand the impacts of AI to our society. And just to highlight a few activities, Beacon is a social justice app that allows people who find themselves in an interaction with the police or other organizations, they feel threatened, to push a button and record the interaction and send an alert to their trusted family or friends. This work now is being in collaboration with South Africa. They have developed a similar application primarily for women who may find themselves in sexual harassment situation. So we're trying to pull together a big project that will deal with this kind of apps for different organizations, and we'll be able to deploy them through social justice groups. We're participating in several events to discuss the role of artificial intelligence in information access. So the UNESCO has a working group on information accessibility. And this past year, the themes were what we know about our right to know and building back better with access to information. And basically the focus was on the legal frameworks that support the citizens' right to know, think FOIP, and the various implementations in different jurisdictions. And we are co-organizing a day-long set of sessions in Canada and AI coming up soon. I think it's next week. In collaboration with Responsible AI, CREATE program in Canada led by Ibrahim Bagheri. There is a panel on ethical implications of AI with Luke Stark, Aroni Dihegde, Katrina Vold, and Elisa Strom of CIFAR, and a tutorial on AI and the law, including the Honorable Paul Grimm, the United States District Court for the District of Maryland, and a virtual meet and greet on everybody who cares to be there and talk about responsible AI and ethical concerns. So have a look at this URL and please join us if you're interested. And Nico told me that I'm running out of time, and I'll close with a shout out to our website. Our last count was about 170 researchers from 11 faculties. You can find cool information about what everybody's doing in the Reverse Expo page that has many, many posters about work across campus. And you can look at our podcast. There are 20 of them with interviewing key people on campus with expertise in various areas. So if you want to get involved, go to our website and send us an email. And what does it mean to get involved? We still have a round of funding for the next year. If you want to get introduced to colleagues who may have expertise that you may be missing for whatever activities you're pursuing, we would be happy to try to put together a new interdisciplinary group and give seed funding to pursue cool problems based on the work that you have been doing, but building more of it. So that's about it. I hope that I have some time to answer some of the questions in the chat, and I'm just terribly excited to be here.
Thanks, Eleni, for a wonderful talk. So we have AI for Society email in the chat box if you want to reach out for collaboration or some guidance or anything you want to talk to these people. So email is in the chat box. Please feel free to reach out. We have a question in the chat box in regards to the first topic. How are you determining what is disinformation in regards to the recent Russia-Ukraine invasion? How does one determine that Russia is lying about a specific topic?
So the specific example I gave you was given to me by a poli-sci expert. So they were knowledgeable and they had friends in the region who they were trusting. And that's where I'm coming with the story. So it was not a technologically discovered factual lie. But from a technology perspective, there are many tools for actually recognizing doctored images. So sometimes this happens. Sometimes people have posted images from previous catastrophes to indicate next catastrophes. The notion of who you trust and what is a trustworthy signal is something that we're interested in exploring. But you're absolutely right. This is a very, very difficult problem. And it has something to do with whether there are many individuals who support the evidence or whether there are a few organizational spokespeople from an organization with an agenda. These are the types of things that we want to explore in order to figure out whether something is true or not, in addition to looking at the doctoring of the media. I mean, deep fakes are an excellent way of producing disinformation. And there is an arms race for making deep fakes and discovering them, recognizing them. So that's where the action is.
Great, Sen. Great. His reply makes sense. Thank you for the presentation. And then there is comment from Amy as well. This is all so amazing. Loved seeing this. I am a student and will definitely look further.
So for students, we don't directly fund students, but do join our website and our newsletter. We frequently advertise positions from faculty members who need research assistance and from companies who have need for people with these kinds of skills.
Great. If anyone has other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly to Eleni, or you can type in your questions in the chat box and I'll read this.
I'll just say that if anything comes to mind or if you have any further questions, I'm always happy to answer. And yes, thank you, Nico, for basically adding this link. You can find information about our members. There are meaningful bios as well as pointers to their Google Scholar and ORCID. So you can find information about whom you might want to be supervised by if you're a student, or who you might want to collaborate with if you are a researcher.
Great. Wonderful. So there are no more questions. Let's thank Eleni for a wonderful talk and engaging discussions. It was really a great talk. I enjoyed it personally as well. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining in today. I hope you had an amazing AI week and great AI seminar. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.